Hello folks, and welcome to another video where I break down a critical issue for us to understand and discuss. My name is Michael Moore, U.S. candidate for the 5th District here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I want to thank you for joining me here, whether you're on our YouTube channel, our website, our Twitter video, or however you found your way to our discussion. Please remember that we are always anxious and receptive towards any comment, idea, suggestion, critique, or message that you might have, whether it's about this subject specifically or our campaign in general. Today we're going to talk about some ideas related to our public education problem and even touch on the concept of the education gap, some very important issues. So specifically, public education of young children. I want to start off by reminding people that elected officials who have been in office for years have still never put together this kind of comprehensive breakdown. The education issue is quite complicated, and for a variety of reasons, it is politically dangerous. The education issue is not something that moves voters or moves people to support a particular candidate, because very few people can detail intelligent and meaningful reforms that are both reasonable and realistic. Politicians rarely, if ever, are willing to speak truthfully about these kind of issues that could be interpreted as making America appear weak or incompetent or lower than the competition. Speaking truthfully about issues like this is often used as a weapon against politicians in future elections, and we all know the risk of someone not being reelected is much more important than being honest or being sincere. Now, before we begin any conversation about education in America, we should explain in detail about certain facts involved. This way everyone knows precisely what we're talking about here. Everybody's on the same page with our terminology and our broader points. The most important concept we have to understand and to recognize is that there are really two systems of education in America. One is private education. The other is public or government subsidized education. This type of public education can also include charter schools. As someone who attended both private and public schools for many years, I understand these differences very well. While in general, private education facilities in the United States are quite successful and competitive worldwide, we have to come to grips with the reality of the fact that government education, which is the education system that the vast majority of children are brought up within, that is to say, public education lags far behind much of the civilized world. When you compare government schools in the United States to many different areas of the globe, including Southeast Asia, large portions of Africa, most of Europe, the Middle East, you'll find that student abilities and competence in those regions far surpass that of their American counterparts. In other words, they are teaching their kids better than we are teaching our kids. In some cases, we're talking about grade gaps of 2 to 3, sometimes 4 class years. In other words, 6th, 7th, or 8th graders in Thailand, for example, often operate at what we would consider to be a 9th, 10th, or an 11th grade level here in America. And here's the worst news. We are trending downwards. In other words, things are getting worse in that the gap is increasing more rapidly over time. Now, when we consider the future that our current preschoolers are going to inherit, we must fully admit that they will be at a tremendous educational disadvantage compared to students in Singapore, Norway, South Korea, Japan, China, Sweden, Germany, Switzerland, India, Vietnam, and elsewhere. These countries that decided long ago to put a supreme emphasis on maintaining the highest possible standards of education for their young citizenry will always be far ahead of us. So we have to first agree that serious, substantial, and systemic reforms and restructuring is desperately needed if American children are going to be able to properly compete in the 21st century and beyond. I want to remind everyone that I totally understand that it's a natural American reaction to believe that everything we do here in America is the best in the world. This means most Americans are under the false impression that our education system is among the best in the world. The reality is that is simply untrue. Perhaps 70 years ago, it was a more accurate description of our world order. But right now, Today, it is not. The sad reality is that America is systematically falling behind many other countries in our efforts to properly educate our children. Extensive international travel has both proven and confirmed to me precisely how far behind we really are and how quickly we are falling further and further behind. We should all take a moment just to recognize that we can't possibly discuss every last aspect of this intensely complex situation right here in this video. We can't solve this large of a problem within the confines of this one issue statement or on one person's website. So let's just start our discussion by looking at a select few of the simple differences between some of these top-tier countries and what we do in America. Again, and I can't say it enough times, we can't discuss everything here. But today, let's just look at a few. We'll say 3 key yet extremely simple points. We'll talk about when kids begin to attend school. We'll talk about what they wear. And we'll talk about how long the school days and years last. We're going to talk about how we can solve this problem, but it's going to have to start at the very beginning. Now, a lot of Americans simply don't ever get the chance to have this discussion, and therefore they have little or no real understanding of the issues that prevent us from accomplishing what might seem like a very simple goal: educating our children properly. In most Asian countries, children begin school basically as soon as they are toilet trained. This means starting full all-day school sessions for 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. And it's likely that to most Americans this concept may seem radical or excessive, but when you consider the tremendous effects and benefits of educating children when they are at that one moment in their life when their minds are the most fertile and the most impressionable, you can begin to see why Asian countries are so far ahead of us. So our first topic is going to be when we begin to send our children to school. We'll call that part 1. It's a weird and complicated connection to have to discuss early childhood education and toilet training. But hear me out. And remember, we're here to solve problems, so that requires telling things truthfully, the way they really are. So we have no choice but to discuss this connection. Americans might be confused about why this issue is so connected and important. But the vast majority of people in America simply don't realize how critical this stage of life is for children. Americans are not taught to understand how failing to immediately toilet train their children, while it does create a tremendous economic boom for the diaper companies, who get an extra 2, 3, sometimes as many as 4 years of sales out of each American child, actually stunts the growth of our children. Just imagine the advanced confidence level of 2- and 3-year-old toilet-trained children going to school and receiving the cognitive skill sets that they'll require for great achievement throughout their academic career, rather than just allowing them to soil themselves in wearable diaper pants until they're 4 or 5 years old, sometimes as old as 6 years. Young children spending their days uncomfortable, failing to learn the critical concepts like authority, respect, social skills, discipline, cooperation, and so on. While many countries would consider it purely nonsensical to purposefully delay one of the most critical points of training for young children, this is exactly what America has been doing for generations. On a very real level, one might claim that it is the invention of disposable diapers that has allowed America to continue to fall behind and become complacent with regard to early education and proper academic preparation for our youngest children. Another issue you might want to think about is that allowing everyone the choice to send our youngest children to school all day gives parents who opt into this resource the opportunity to achieve whatever needs they have. Remember that not all of us have the resources or even the opportunity to become the world's greatest at-home teachers. Whether it's work, taking proper care of newborn babies, or simply accomplishing the various needs of their household without being obligated to provide personal daycare for their own children, who, by all rights, should already be in school. So children learn the most when they are the youngest. We already know this. This has been scientifically proven time and time again. Humans develop more as babies and small children than they do throughout the entire rest of their lives. This specifically includes their brains, the formation of the fundamental building blocks of their intellect. Full day school allows our youngest children to learn the basics of language, of social structure, of discipline, of obedience, basic life skills, such as eating, putting on clothes, putting away their toys, tying their shoes, experimenting with musical instruments, learning to play with others, and so much more. Let's be sure to fully understand what we're talking about here. The youngest children in the best schools in the world, they don't go to school to get on computers right away or start learning foreign languages, playing chess with each other, processing complicated mathematical calculus. That's not how it works. That's not what we are talking about here. Children engage in play acting, in storytelling, in story listening. They do singing songs, they play music, they do coloring, arts and crafts, walking in lines, holding hands, structured discussion in groups with each other and with instructors. Learning words for everyday objects, uplifting and inspiring videos, and then practicing all these various skills with repetition. In other words, they do precisely what the richest families are able to provide for their children, or through private, extended, and expensive daycare options. Now, by doing this, it means that by the time children are 4 or 5 years old and ready for actual educational schoolwork, they've already mastered many of the fundamental learning basics that will help them focus, study, learn, and produce results. It's also important to remember that children, especially young children, love to go to school. It is literally their favorite thing to be a part of. It is absolutely critical for them and for everyone involved with them, the parents, the teachers, the schools themselves, to capitalize on that positive feeling and fully normalize, embrace that positive attitude. Rather than focusing on behaviors and delays that promote this continuous struggle with children about going to school, about being forced to try to readjust an unnecessarily learned negative attitude towards school at an older age. And any parent that struggles with their child about going to school or about keeping a positive attitude about school and learning understands this problem so well. And they understand what it can mean over the long term of a child's education and over the long term of a person's life. Solving the education gap. Okay? So this basic understanding that we have about this situation, now we can easily see how and why certain children get such a real advantage and a head start with their education. An extra point we should keep in mind is that these other countries have significantly less behavior problems or special education children than we have in America. And what we should be asking ourselves is the way these other countries educate their children the reason why they have such a conflict-free educational system? And we'll circle back to that point as we continue to discuss some other intelligent and simple changes that we can make. But everyone should be able to recognize the absolute truth of this first point simply by comparing their own experience and their own understanding of the different environments in which children in America are raised. We all know that those children who were fortunate enough to have an upbringing which included early learning, like reading, learning to count, simple math, having long conversations with older kids, older siblings, or adults, and so much more. Children whose parents took it upon themselves to educate and really teach them long before they ever started attending school have a clear advantage and are far less likely to fail or develop behavior problems. We all know this, and it's long overdue that we should incorporate what we know into our system itself. We will circle back to this critical point in a moment. The bottom line is that the reforms I'm suggesting and describing finally and absolutely solve multiple generational problems such as the education gap. Now we're going to continue this conversation in our next video. I want you to remember you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel at any time. Just click on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on Twitter. We've got lots of these videos out now and more coming up all the time. Thank you for paying attention and thank you for your support. I appreciate your taking the time to pay attention to this video with us today. And there's more on this education subject coming up in our very next video.